But it seems, Jared Diamond, national baseball writer from the Wall Street Journal, that every time the Phillies get into this spot, they sweep the Cubs, they lose 2 out of 3 to the Padres. They sweep the Sox. Why can't they beat teams like the Marlins? Why can't they beat teams like the Padres? Are we getting set for a weekend of failure for Philadelphia again, or do you think that they're finally ready to turn the corner?
Well, I think what you're describing is a wild card contender. They are every wild card contender by definition is frustrating. That's why they're in that position, because you think they are good enough to just make a run, and you say, man, if they could just go on 1-8-2 streak, things would be so easy. They'd be able to claim the playoff spot easily, and they never do. And that's why the Phillies are sort of in that mush with the Mets, with the Brewers, with the Cubs and Cardinals. And look, it's frustrating for Phillies fans, but it's going to make September very interesting when these 4 or 5 teams are battling for 2 spots.
Yeah, and we, watching them every single night, the frustration, a lot of it comes with the pitching. The starting pitching just can't go deep in the games. But do you think that some of these cast-offs, some of these arms that Matt Klentak went out and got, Parker, Hughes, they just kind of found some cast-offs who have had some past success. Are they starting to kind of – is Kapler getting a better feel for this bullpen now?
Yeah, it seems like it. They have more weapons, I think, is the biggest thing. It's much easier to manage a bullpen when you have bullpen options that are not terrible. And they sort of have that now. They've picked up some people over the last couple of the last 6 weeks or so, like you mentioned, Jared Hughes, Blake Parker, a few other guys that sort of found lying around. And those small moves, they tend not to get a lot of attention at the time. But when it comes to making the playoffs or succeeding in the playoffs, it's often those small moves that have the biggest impact. And it just makes things easier when you have depth and you have options. And right now, it seems like the Phillies have it. Their pitching is sort of slowly but surely coming into shape. It was obviously disappointing for them to lose Jake Arrieta for the rest of the season. But look, they have the pieces. I don't think there's ever been
Was it?
That they have the pieces. Look, we all thought they had the pieces. Just would they be able to put it together?
Yeah.
Hasn't happened yet. Talk about frustrating. I can't imagine what it's like to watch Bryce Harper every day when he's hitting like 400 runners on base and 150 with nobody on base. That's a real head scratcher.
All right, let me get your take on the usage of Rhys Hoskins in the leadoff spot. A lot of people text in or call in and they want to know what is the theory of using him leadoff. And I would say, I'm not a big analytical guy. I'm not anti-analytics. I'm just saying it's just not the way that I was, kind of brought up on the game. And I say, well, I'm assuming they just are looking at his on-base percentage and then saying, let's put him in the leadoff spot and try to utilize that. Do you like Hoskins hitting leadoff?
I understand why they're doing it. His on-base percentage is .381, which is very good. It's among the best on the team. And the other thing to remember about all of this is that in today's baseball, when seemingly everybody has power and anybody can hit a ball out of the ballpark, there isn't as much of an incentive to sort of put your quote-unquote power hitters in the middle of the lineup because everybody's a power hitter. And the Phillies have other power hitters in Bryce Harper and JT Realmuto and some of these other guys. So it sort of makes sense to have someone like Hoskins who can hit a home run, obviously hits a lot of them, but also gets on base at a high clip and is there when Harper comes up. Because at this point, like I said, the way the season's going, you just want Harper to bat with runners on base as much as humanly possible.
Jared Diamond covers Major League Baseball for the Wall Street Journal as we are getting to the final week of August. Now, last year, we looked at this, Jared. The Phillies were 10 games over 500 at this time. Now they're 6 games over 500. So do we feel better about that team finished 12-24 down the stretch? Do we feel better about this team, even though they're only 6 games over 500, as opposed to last year's team that was 10 games over 500?
Well, it helps that they're only 2 games out of a wild card, so it's very, very attainable with about 5 weeks to go. And I understand how disappointing last year was for Phillies fans to see a team just melt down. That's what happened. The Phillies last year seemed like they had a playoff spot in good shape and just totally fell apart. There's no reason to think that will happen again. I mean, there's no reason why it should happen again. that was a very sort of unexpected and unfortunate collapse. I think really that's what it was for the Phillies last year, and there's no reason to believe it'll happen again. I think the bigger question with the Phillies is just, are they going to be able to emerge from this group of teams? They're currently in fourth place in their own division. They're currently behind the Mets, so they have work to do. They have to keep winning because there's a lot of teams ahead of them at this point. I think that's just the biggest challenge. That it's 2 games, but there's still a couple teams they have to jump over.
Yeah, they got that 5-game set with the Nationals coming up. They play the Braves down the stretch here. It'll be interesting. Jared, I want to get your take on this. Gabe Kapler at the top of the list, obviously, for our audience, but just in baseball. A lot of people don't like Kapler here. He does it. My point is this. I don't really know what my opinion of Kapler is. I will say I'm a more traditional baseball fan, but I find it to not be fair to judge Kapler because I'm judging him on a style of baseball that I'm not really as open to. So I'm judging him as a traditional baseball manager, which he isn't, and I now believe that that's not fair. I can't say the guy stinks or he doesn't know what he's doing. He just doesn't translate to the game that I enjoy. So is that what's going on in baseball, that there's this kind of this headbutt of these traditional baseball theories, and the guys managing the game today aren't going by that book anymore?
Yeah, it's not just Gabe Kapler.
Right.
Gabe Kapler sort of is viewed as sort of the king of analytics when it comes to managers, but he's really not alone. With all managers, there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of decisions made by people above them in the organization, and the job of the manager has changed. The reality is Gabe Kapler doesn't have as much of an impact on the success or failure of the Phillies as fans want to believe. Gabe Kapler's job is primarily to fulfill an organizational plan that's laid out by his bosses and sort of keep the clubhouse from completely melting down, which doesn't seem like it has. So as long as the clubhouse isn't, fighting with one another, he's more or less doing his job. That is a huge part of the job for a manager today. It's just managing the people, managing the personalities, not doing much managing in terms of the games.
Yeah, that's something that we were kind of debating on Monday is, look, last year they won 80 games with a roster that was probably average to poor. This year they're in the mix again. They've lost 6 bullpen arms. They're on their 4th center fielder. They lost their leadoff man. I mean, I don't know. I mean, is that a recipe to suggest that the manager is actually doing a good job? More so than, is he doing a good job and we just don't enjoy the game the way it's being played today?
Yeah, well, that's a larger question about baseball in general right now, which is sort of the best way to win equal the most entertaining style to watch. This is something that baseball as an industry is very much grappling with as we move into this era where it's all about home runs and a lot of the little aesthetic things about baseball that people have enjoyed for decades are leaving the game in many ways. The question becomes, does baseball as an industry have to say, you know what, these things are worth preserving, and we have to sort of put more rules or do some things to ensure that they are preserved? Because teams are going to try to do its best to win. That is their job. They're not really concerned about whether fans actually enjoy watching it. And there's definitely fans, there's undoubtedly fans that just do not like the style of baseball that's being played around the country in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, I've played baseball my whole life. I still coach baseball, and it's just really hard to watch sometimes that the theory, and then the Phillies, I'd love to get your take on what's going on there internally where they are so analytical, and then they bring Charlie Manuel in. I find this to be an interesting crossroads for them because 40 games with like 40-some games left, he's going to be gone and walking out the door. But I find this to be a very interesting confrontation between that side and then the traditional side banging heads inside that dugout right now.
Well, look, there's always a pendulum in everything. And in baseball, the pendulum had shifted so far, not just in the direction of analytics, but also in the direction of youth, of just sort of not valuing experience. That's where baseball has become. Managers, look at the average age of managers today. They're young. They don't have a lot of experience. You see coaches increasingly who have very little experience. There's many coaches today in baseball that didn't play baseball themselves or barely played baseball themselves and now coaching. in the major leagues. And there's no doubt there's value in that. Teams have found great value in these non-traditional hires. But perhaps the pendulum did swing a little too far. Now you have teams recognizing, hey, there's a reason why a guy like Charlie Manuel was so respected for so many decades. The same goes with the Mets and their 82-year-old pitching coach, Phil Regan. That was a hire that got mocked when it was made. It was the subject of jokes, and here they are. The Mets have gone an incredible run ever since he arrived. Maybe we've forgotten that there is these older guys, these experienced guys could still pitch a little bit.
Well, and it's funny because, you're right. In New York, that was getting laughed at, and then that kind of turned their season around. And now the Phillies, their offense is, I don't want to say changed or anything, but you definitely see a different approach, I feel anyway, at the plate. And it's like, hey, look, the theories and the things that these guys were teaching, they're not antiquated or wrong. It's just that you've added just a plethora of more ideas, and it almost seems like sometimes it hurts that you're putting so much information into these guys' head.
Yeah, look, it's still baseball. The stuff that Charlie Manuel always believed, it worked. There's no reason why it doesn't still work. Good coaches are ones that are able to take all of the information that's now available and not abandon the knowledge that they have, but use the information and the sort of history, the knowledge that they have in their brain, and put them together to become a teacher. Coaching is about teaching, and a good coach should want all of the information that's possible, that's available for him. He should want it. But it doesn't mean you completely abandon sort of what's worked for so long. And I think it's not a coincidence that the Mets and the Phillies have started to have some success with these older coaches. These guys are good.
We all have like our inner Rick Renneria, right?
Yeah, I suppose so. There's value in experience in any industry, not just baseball. And it's just a matter of figuring out how to use the new age with the old school and put it together. And that's what the good teams do best.
Jared Diamond, Wall Street Journal, who's also came with the report that Major League Baseball telling their players they cannot participate in the winter leagues this offseason. And a lot of people don't understand the value or what happens in those winter leagues, but this is a very interesting story that could affect some of these organizations.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation that's wrapped up in, of course, a much more serious situation in what's happening in Venezuela and what's happening here in the U.S. regarding Venezuela. But the gist of it is that MLB for now is saying that it would be a violation of the U.S.'s embargo against Venezuela for players to play in the Venezuelan Winter League, which that matters a lot. There are, as we know, about 100 Venezuelan major leaguers right now. There's many, many more in the minor leagues. Plus, these winter leagues are ways for minor league players who are paid very, very little to supplement their income in the off season. And essentially what's happened is one of the big ones has been taken away from them. And I'm not saying that MLB is doing the wrong thing. It is a legal issue at some point. But I do sympathize for these players who are saying, hey, I need that money. I'm from Venezuela. What am I supposed to do? Do they not go home and play somewhere else, or do they go home and not play? It's a very tough situation.
Read more about that at Jared Diamond on Twitter. He's from the Wall Street Journal, national baseball writer who covers the league. And, of course, we're down the stretch. Phillies, Marlins. We'll see what happens. Can they finally knock off a bad team and get that momentum? The Braves had a run. The Nationals have had a run. The Mets went on a streak. We were waiting for that Phillies run. Does it start this weekend? They've won 6 of 8. We'll see. Jared, appreciate the time. Have a great weekend, man.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, Jared Diamond, like all guests, paired via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.